There's nothing more exhilarating than pointing out the shortcomings of others, is there?
This video was made possible due to those who support me on Patreon, and I'd like to give a big shout out to patrons Chris Hutchison, Dan Ray, Flake, Harrison, Joseph Abrams, Majin Weeaboo, Ness Lee, and Stephen Dillon. Thank you all for your support. I had been aware of the 1962 Japanese film Harakiri for some time before I decided to finally give it a watch. However, I can say that I wasn't skeptical that it was overhyped. It currently the #1 ranked narrative film on Letterboxd, and after watching it, I can now confidently say that I was completely wrong. In fact, despite its wide acclaim, I'd argue that it is somehow still underrated and should be in any serious cinephile discussion in regard to the greatest films of all time. In addition to being an astonishing film, Harakiri bestowed upon us perhaps the most based motherfucker in cinema history, Hanshiro Tsugomo, a character who every young man should look to as a beacon of healthy masculinity. Specifically, I want to use Hanshiro as our primary focus to discuss the merits of a certain masculine trait that has been the subject of fierce debate, and that trait is Stoicism. Now, Stoicism traditionally refers to an entire school of philosophy that came about in ancient Greece and Rome. However, I don't feel like going into all that since I'm not a fucking dweeb, so I'm going to stick with the more contemporary and simplified concept of the term, which basically is the idea that, as a man, you should show very little, if any, outward emotion. Men should not cry, complain, or show any sign of weakness. They should be strong, formidable, the rock that one's wife and children can look to for reassurance. However, while some would argue that Stoicism is the cornerstone of what it means to be a man, others deride it as an example of toxic masculinity that can lead to severe consequences. So, what is the reason for this divide? Well, the issue is that when people discuss Stoicism, they often are conflating and or confusing two different ideas: emotional control and emotional repression. Emotional control is great, perhaps one of the most valuable skills one can possess, to still feel emotions but not allow them to dictate your actions. This is the lesson we learned in our last episode when discussing the character of Dalton in Roadhouse. Dalton is not a man devoid of feeling. Rather, he was able to rein in his emotions via discipline and rigorous training. In fact, I'd venture to guess that the most emotionally stable people are, in fact, the most in touch with their emotions, who are not afraid or ashamed to set emotions, yet understand that there are times when harnessing them can be not only advantageous, but even necessary. Which brings us to today's subject, Hanshiro Tsugomo. A former warrior and widow, left to raise his daughter Miho on his own, following the death of his closest friend, Hanshiro honors his former comrade's final wish to care for his son, Motome. Later in life, Hanshiro supports Miho by making a humble living as a craftsman. Struggling financially and not wanting to resort to have Miho being married off to some callous lord, Hanshiro humbles himself to Motome, now a teacher, and asks him to take Miho's hand in marriage. Miho and Motome are betrothed and have a son, Kingo. Together, Hanshiro, Miho, Motome, and Kingo live a peaceful life as a loving family. Despite being no stranger to war or battle, Hanshiro is not a man who feels shame for expressing his emotions. He proves himself to be a loving and dutiful single father. He openly shows sorrow following the death of his closest friend, displays humility when he asks Motome to take Miho's hand in marriage, and delights in his grandson Kingo. He is not a man who is repressed by any means, who feels as though he must restrain his emotions out of fear of being seen as weak. Rather, he is a kind, warm, expressive man who appreciates his blessings and finds joy in living a humble life with those he loves, allowing himself to both feel and express his emotions free of judgment or self-consciousness. But tragedy strikes when both Miho and Kingo fall gravely ill with tuberculosis. Desperate to find a way to avert their deaths, Motome travels to the estate of the Ii clan and requests to commit the ritualistic suicide act known as seppuku, also known as harakiri, doing so with the hope that the members of the clan will take mercy on him and give him a job or at least some money he can use to purchase medicine. However, the members of the Ii clan, assuming Motome is simply a greedy extortionist looking for a handout, decide to make an example of him. Instead of sending him on his way, the clan members demand Motome fall through with his request, deny his plea for a few days' reprieve to set his affairs in order, and even force him to disembowel himself with his own mock bamboo blades, him having pawned his actual blades to support his family. As a result, Motome is forced to endure a long, painful, and utterly degrading death, without being able to say goodbye to his loved ones. With Motome dead, Hanshiro is left helpless as he is forced to witness both Miho and Kingo succumb to their illness. With nothing left to live for, Hanshiro decides to confront the members of the Ii clan, initially concealing his true identity in relation to Motome, slowly revealing to them the circumstances surrounding his son-in-law's death in an attempt to call out their blatant hypocrisy and chastise them for their lack of compassion. However, despite how enraged Hanshiro is at the members of the Ii clan for what they did to Motome, he does not allow his emotions to deter his mission. He knows that in order to stick it to these bastards, he needs to keep a cool head. He is aware that if he just immediately flies off the handle, they will catch on to his true intentions and cut him down without a word. Thus, he must remain calm and collected. He keeps his despair concealed for the time being in order to do what he must. Hanshiro does not fear or deny his emotions, rather, he is a master of them, and thus can allow them to flourish openly or keep them under lock and key, depending on what is necessary for the given situation. While the ability to express one's emotions is good, there are times when being able to keep them under control can be vital. Let's say you are playing some sort of sport. Being able to maintain your composure can be advantageous, so as to not allow your opponent to gain a competitive edge. Or let's say you are being accosted by someone at a bar or are in an argument with your partner. In both of these situations, while your veins might be pumping with adrenaline, it is best to stay calm so as not to make matters worse by either exploding into a fit of rage or saying something you know you'll regret but can't take back. Even removing yourself from the situation in order to collect your composure is often a reasonable and even responsible move. This form of stoicism is a vital skill for anyone, not just men, to possess. But this is something that must be earned and developed. Imagine you walk into the gym for the very first time and someone says to you, "Okay, go bench 3 plates." Obviously you would say, "Well, hang on, that's ridiculous. I have never bench pressed in my life. Maybe I will one day be able to bench that much weight, but I have to start off small and work my way up." Emotional control is the exact same thing. It is a skill like anything else. You have to slowly work your way up. Sit with your emotions, feel your emotions, allow yourself to be angry or upset, as doing so allows you to recognize said feelings and find ways to process them in a healthy and productive manner, as opposed to just ignoring them and letting them unwillingly dictate your behavior. Yet, sadly, this is something that many young men are not given the tools to do. And this is where we come to emotional repression. From a young age, boys are taught to not show emotion at all, to simply grit their teeth and endure. But once these boys become men, who are then expected to be emotional rocks, they are left in crisis as they have had no training in being able to do so. So when these same men are faced with the major stressors of life, heartbreak, financial difficulty, losing a loved one, how can you expect them to be able to weather the storm? I am sure many of you may be under the presumption that women are more emotional than men. However, I would argue that this depends on what we mean when we say emotional. I think one can safely presume that women are more willing to emote, to cry, to express frustration or anger. But just because women are more likely to express emotions doesn't mean they are more emotional. When we look at rates of violence or substance abuse, what it seems to indicate is that men are not less emotional, but rather that they have no healthy outlet for their emotions, which in turn leads to many men exploding into a violent frenzy, using alcohol or drugs to dull the pain, or finally deciding that the weight is simply too much to bear. And yet, the same people who expect men to be these structures of fortitude mock them for attempting to find some way to deal with their emotions in a healthy manner. That is not to say that there is only one way for a man to do so. The point is that in order to be able to harness your emotions, you need to confront them somehow in a controlled manner. And deriding men for doing so, while also shaming them for not being stoic gods, is simply nonsensical. That's like expecting someone to be able to shred a guitar solo like Terry Kath, but then calling them gay when you see them practicing their scales. These men are so afraid of being perceived as unmanly that it prevents them from putting in the work to become men of true value. They are merely posers, which is another theme we see explored in the film. While Hanshiro agrees that Motome's deception was dishonorable, he notes that the E clan didn't even bother to ask why he wanted to commit seppuku, and if they had, they would see that he was not a greedy man, but rather a loving father and husband who would do anything to save his loved ones. Perhaps my favorite moment in the film is when Hanshiro discovers that Motome pawned his blades. While the E clan considers this a shameful act, Hanshiro recognizes that Motome only did so to provide for his family. Hanshiro even laments that he himself was not strong enough to pawn his own blades, and wonders that if he had swallowed his pride and done so, could this have circumvented the fates of Motome, Miho, and Kingo? Hanshiro sees that Motome was the most respectful man of them all, as he was willing to do anything he could for his family, even if it made him seem weak in the eyes of others. But because the members of the E clan were so scared of being perceived as feeble if they had shown mercy to Motome, it led to them doing something so utterly callous. To drive the point home, Hanshiro reveals that prior to his arrival, he tracked down the 3 men who returned Motome's body to their home and mocked his death, and defeated each of them in battle, not killing them, but severing their top knots, a mark of great shame and defeat. While normally a warrior who has had his top knot removed would, based on the code the E clan claims to live by, commit seppuku, the 3 men instead go into hiding to allow their top knots to grow back, preventing others from witnessing their dishonor. Thus, Hanshiro has proven that these so-called men of honor did not kill Motome due to their loyal adherence to their culture's code, but rather because they took pleasure in asserting their authority over him, them being more concerned with others perceiving them as honorable than actually being so. It is not uncommon that these same men who are so vigilant about policing how other men behave, holding them to the standards of some toxic paradigm of masculinity, are far from the models of virtue that they desperately want everyone else to perceive them to be. These men care more about the validation they get from others believing they are men of reverence, instead of the inner strength and confidence one builds from embracing humility in order to truly become one. And thus, knowing that these men who call themselves warriors are in fact cowards, Hanshiro accepts that he will not be leaving the compound alive, fighting valiantly to the death, slaying multiple members of the clan, before being shamefully gunned down. In the end, the only true men of honor in our story, Motome and Hanshiro, are recorded as having been weak, dishonorable men, while the Ii clan is able to maintain their perception as a prime example of the Bushido Code. The film's conclusion delivering a sobering and harsh truth, that as long as the world is run by men who are more concerned with the perceptions of others instead of living by their own stated creed, true men of strength and honor will be forced to pay the price. And now, I unfortunately must once again address something I really don't want to address, but I know people are going to bring it up in the comments, so I need to get it out of the way. Some may say that, well, hey, I have no problem being emotional or opening up about my feelings, but what if there are chicks watching? What if they think I am weak? What if they think I'm a pussy? Once again, contrary to what any alpha male imbecile says on social media, the idea that most women will be instantly turned off the moment they see a guy express emotion or be vulnerable simply isn't true. These women do exist, but manosphere echo chambers make these instances seem way more frequent than they actually are. That is not to say that you being an emotionally unstable mess is something that you should strive for. If you are constantly crying or getting upset or getting angry, just a completely erratic mess, then obviously women aren't going to be attracted to you. But that isn't because women don't like men being emotional, it's because it denotes poor emotional control. Same goes for women. If you're a dude and you meet a woman who is constantly breaking down or flying off the handle or bitching about literally everything, are you going to be attracted to her? Of course not. On the other side of the spectrum, being a completely emotionless robot can be just as, if not more detrimental to the success of your relationship. If I have a bad day, some alpha male douches might say that I should keep it to myself and not open up about it to my wife, as it may make me look weak in her eyes. The only problem is that my wife knows me like the back of her hand. If I come home in a bad mood, she is going to be able to read me like a book. And when she asks me what is wrong, and I say nothing, that isn't indicative of a healthy relationship. All it will lead to is a tension-filled household. The problem is that too many dudes online see being emotional as an all-or-nothing sort of thing. You are either a based stoic alpha who never shows your emotions to anyone, or you're a whining beta pussy boy who cries and complains constantly, as if a healthy middle ground doesn't exist. This is less a case of emotional control being an inherently masculine trait and more a sign of being a stable adult. Man or woman, you want your partner to be emotionally well-balanced instead of acting like a petulant toddler. However, what if you do open up to your girlfriend or wife and she does react poorly? What if you do confide in her about something difficult in your life and she becomes turned off or is no longer attracted to you? What if you cry in front of her and she decides to break up with you because of this? Well, to that, I simply say,
good.
Why would you want someone like that as the person you are going to depend on most for the rest of your life? Your partner, above anyone else, is the one person you should be able to be completely open and honest with. The alternative would be to live your entire life walking on eggshells, hoping that you never slip up because, if you do, she will immediately drop your ass. If you want to live that life, I suppose that is your prerogative, but as for me, I would rather rip my own intestines out with a bamboo stick. Becoming a true stoic man is an invaluable trait, but what you have to understand is that in order to become said man, you need to risk being vulnerable. Just like if you are someone who has never been to the gym and has to start by benching the bar, you might feel embarrassed. But if you are making an effort to improve yourself, there is nothing to be ashamed about, and anyone who mocks you for doing so is not worth your time. In order to be able to control your emotions, you need to be courageous enough to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to explore your emotions, to feel your emotions, so you can find a way to process them. In order to become a man who isn't bound by silly, rigid archetypes of toxic bullshit, who is able to live your own life on your own terms without being burdened by the opinions of cowardly charlatans, who is a master of your emotions, who can control them when needed, but is not ashamed of being able to express joy, humility, or sorrow, who understands that compassion is a sign of strength, not weakness. Don't be a dumbass alpha shithead. Don't be a member of the Butthole E clan. Be a Hanshiro.